so we're all pretty familiar with the Christmas story, right? Manger,
Yeah.
shepherds, the whole 9 yards. But in this deep dive, we're looking at it from a slightly different angle.
Yeah.
We're going to be diving into a sermon by Steven Armstrong, and he talks about Joseph's reaction to Mary's pregnancy.
Yeah.
And I mean, can you imagine, like,
Oh, man.
finding out your fiance is pregnant before the wedding? Like, that's a big deal now.
Huge. Yeah.
But back then,
Yeah.
I mean, that was a scandal of epic proportions.
It's amazing how, we think we know the Christmas story, but then you come at it from a different perspective, and it's like, whoa, I never thought about it that way before.
Exactly, yeah. And you know what Armstrong does? He has this really funny anecdote in this sermon about a guy with an ugly baby.
Mm-hmm.
And it just illustrates how, like, back then when a situation like this happened, like, everyone just assumed the worst.
Oh, yeah. It was just the automatic assumption, like, well, obviously something's fishy here.
Right. And so before we get to Joseph's reaction,
Yeah.
I think it's really important to understand the context of betrothal in ancient Jewish culture.
Right.
So what was the big deal with betrothal?
So betrothal was a lot more serious than, like just a modern day engagement, like where you exchange rings.
Yeah, okay.
It was basically like a pre-marriage contract. It was legally binding. There was actually, a financial transaction involved, and the couple was obligated to remain chaste.
So it wasn't just like, hey, we'll see how this goes.
No.
It was like serious business.
Yeah, you couldn't just break it off with a text message.
Right.
There were some serious social and legal repercussions, and especially for the woman, it was a really big deal.
Right. Which makes Mary's situation all the more precarious.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because, I mean, if Joseph suspects infidelity, I mean, things can get really, really bad for her.
Yeah, Armstrong, he points out that under Jewish law, she could have been stoned to death. It was a life or death situation.
So, okay, so the stakes are high, right?
Yeah.
Like really, really high.
Mm.
So how does Joseph react when he finds out about Mary's pregnancy?
Well, the sermon describes Joseph as a righteous man, which meant that he was deeply committed to upholding the law, but it also says that he was merciful.
Okay.
So he's in this awful dilemma. Like, on the one hand, he feels like he has to do something, He can't just ignore what he believes to be this moral transgression.
Right.
But at the same time, he's also got this deep compassion for Mary.
So he's not just some like angry, betrayed fiance.
Right.
There's a real internal struggle going on.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, he could have just like exposed her publicly and really made a huge spectacle of the whole thing.
Right.
But instead, he decides that he's going to divorce her quietly to protect her.
I mean, that's really selfless when you think about it.
It is.
Like he's putting her well-being above his own hurt feelings.
Exactly. And it really reveals, I think, a lot about his character, that he's not impulsive,
Right.
He's really thoughtful. He's weighing his options. He's trying to find a way to be both just and merciful in a really, really difficult situation.
It makes him seem much more human, I think.
Yeah.
He's not just this character in a story.
Right.
He's a real person who's grappling with this like impossible situation.
And I think that's what makes this sermon so interesting, because it's taking us beyond, like the kind of the sanitized version of the Christmas story that we get from like Christmas carols and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's like we're getting this behind the scenes look at the raw, messy reality of what Joseph might have been going through.
And it makes you realize like, wow, this is a real story with real people and real emotions.
Yeah, it's not just, like a Hallmark movie.
Right.
This is real life.
Right. And this is where I think it gets really fascinating, because you have this righteous man who's trying to do the right thing.
Uh-huh.
You have Mary, his pregnant fiancée.
Mm-hmm.
And you have all this cultural baggage surrounding betrothal.
Right.
So where do we go from here?
Well, that's where the divine intervention comes in.
Okay.
And we'll have to say that for part 2.
Okay, so last we left off, Joseph was trying to figure out what to do about Mary, and it seemed like he was leaning towards this quiet divorce to, try and protect her.
Yeah, and what's so powerful about that decision is that it really speaks to Joseph's character, right? He could have gone the route of anger and public shaming, but instead he chooses compassion. He chooses to be discreet.
Yeah, absolutely. It just makes you wonder though, like, what's going on in his head? Is he heartbroken? Is he confused, angry? Like, Probably all of the above, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, can you imagine just the whirlwind of emotions he must be going through? He's a man of faith, and he's trying to make sense of something that like completely defies his understanding of how the world works.
And then on top of all that, Mary has to explain herself, right? And it's not like, oh, honey, I'm late. It's like, oh, by the way, the Holy Spirit. I mean, not exactly an everyday conversation starter, even back then.
It's hard to even imagine, like, how do you even explain that to someone?
Right.
You know, she's carrying this incredible secret, this divine miracle, and she's trying to tell someone who, like, understandably is probably like, wait, what?
Right, exactly. And Armstrong really highlights this in the sermon, like this clash of worldviews. You've got Joseph, who's very rooted in the tangible, in the law, what he can observe.
Right.
And then you have Mary, who's suddenly operating on this whole other level, this spiritual reality.
It's such an interesting tension, isn't it? You have Joseph, who is trying to be rational, trying to be just within the framework that he knows.
Right.
And then you have Mary, who is like experiencing something that completely transcends human understanding.
Yeah. And it's just like, how do you bridge that gap? How do you even begin to reconcile those two perspectives?
And that's where the divine intervention comes in. So according to the Gospel of Matthew, an angel appears to Joseph in a dream.
Okay.
And reveals the truth about Mary's pregnancy.
So it's not just Mary's word against his perception of what's possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
He's actually getting a direct message.
Right. And the angel doesn't just confirm Mary's story like, oh yeah, no, she's telling the truth. It's like, no, let me give you the big picture here.
Right.
This child, this is not just any child. This is the Messiah. This is the one who's been prophesied to save his people.
Oh, wow. Talk about a plot twist. So suddenly this whole like personal dilemma, it gets like blown up into this huge cosmic narrative.
It's not just about, like solving this personal crisis.
Right.
It's about Joseph choosing to step into this incredible destiny, this divine plan that's unfolding.
And I mean, let's be real, saying yes to that, that's not easy, right? I mean, you're talking about accepting a truth that totally defies logic. You might face social ostracism.
Yeah.
And you're taking on the responsibility of raising the Son of God.
And Armstrong makes this point that, accepting the angel's message meant embracing the impossible. It meant trusting in something beyond what Joseph could comprehend.
So what happens? What does he do? Does he just crumble under the weight of it all, or does he like rise to the occasion? Okay, so we left Joseph with this massive revelation, right? An angel appears in a dream, confirms Mary's pregnant, and then just drops this bombshell like, oh yeah, this baby, he's the Messiah.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, how do you even process that?
Right. It's like, how do you even wrap your head around that? Everything you thought you knew, everything you thought your life was going to be, it's all just like completely flipped on its head.
Totally. And remember, this is a guy who's like all of the tradition, the law, things he can see and touch, and then suddenly, bam, supernatural, the divine. That's got to rock your world.
Yeah. Armstrong really makes that point in the sermon. It's like Joseph's faith is being put to the ultimate test. It's not about following rules anymore. It's about trusting in something that like your brain is telling you is impossible.
Makes you wonder, like, what was that moment for him? When did he go from, wait, what, to, okay, I believe?
Yeah.
What made him decide to trust the angel and go all in on this wild, miraculous journey?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think a big part of it had to be, who Joseph was as a person. We've seen he's a man of integrity, he's compassionate, he's got a strong sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
Those qualities, those had to play a role in how he responded.
He could have just been like, nope, weird dream, moving on, stuck with the quiet divorce plan, avoided the whole thing. But he doesn't. He chooses to believe, to trust in something way bigger than himself.
And that's what makes him such a pivotal figure in all this, right? He's not just standing there watching this happen. He's actively participating in this huge divine plan. He's choosing faith over fear, obedience over what's easy.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the biggest, most powerful acts of faith, they happen quietly inside us, when we're wrestling with our doubts, our fears, and how we see the world.
Absolutely. And think about the courage it took, right? Joseph knew he had to know people would talk, judge him, maybe even ostracize him and Mary.
Yeah, for sure.
But he still chose to do what he believed was God's will, no matter the cost.
That's a message that speaks to everyone, I think. Having that courage to stand up for what you believe in, even when it goes against what everyone else thinks, or even what you thought was possible.
Yeah, exactly. Joseph's story is like this invitation to all of us, right? To look at our own faith, to ask ourselves, what do I believe in so strongly that I'd be willing to fight for it, even when it seems impossible?
And that's what makes this whole deep dive into Joseph's reaction so fascinating. It takes us past the Christmas story we think we know and into the mind and heart of this guy who's struggling with doubt, fear, and then ultimately this incredible call to faith.
It reminds us that even in the stories we've heard a million times, there's always something deeper to discover, something that can challenge us to see the world and ourselves in a new way.
So next time you hear the Christmas story, take a minute. Think about Joseph. Think about his journey, his courage, his commitment to something so much bigger than himself.
And maybe, just maybe, his story can inspire us to do the same in our own lives.
On that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Joseph's journey and the miracle of the Christmas story. Thanks for joining us.